Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I want to welcome each of you to our program today. Now, this program is part of a series which I'm very excited about. We did a virtual event. The event was called Reimagining Higher Education and the University of the Future. We brought in 4 panelists to share their insights with us. Those panelists represent 3 different countries, 3 different universities, plus the giant educational publishing company, Wiley. So today's episode is with Mark Bramwell. He's the CIO of Said Business School at the University of Oxford. He's also just been voted a top 100 CIO in the UK. So a real exciting event there as well. So stay with me as we hear Mark's insights in their entirety in this episode today. Welcome to the next part of our program, which is called our Fireside Chat, or our virtual fireside. We're going to talk about the University of Tomorrow and the role of technology. So I want to welcome all of our panelists, and let's get right in here for our Fireside Chat. Let's start with you, Mark. Mark, the universities have been on a digital path or digital journey for a long time, even before this pandemic. How do you think the pandemic will change the trajectory or that journey that universities were already on?
Hi, Kevin. Thank you. That's a great question, and thanks for having me on the panel today. I think from my experience, it's right that what you say, universities have been on a digital transformation for some time, but I think what you'll see is different universities are at different stages on that, depending on the types of the legacy infrastructure, the legacy systems, the legacy challenges that they've had to face. So not everybody, from my experience, is in the same place. The one thing that we have seen that the pandemic has brought around, and clearly none of us would have envisaged sort of 9 months later we would still be where we are today, but the pandemic has seen an exponential acceleration of those digital transformations. With that, higher education has not been immune and has not been any different to any other organization. So from a personal experience, what we've seen at Said Business School is we have in effect delivered and implemented 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 weeks during March. And I think we have been perhaps very well placed and fortunate in that because of some of the technology decisions and investments that we previously made with the support of the school's board. So our move to external data center hosting, to cloud provisions, to software as a service, our investment in enterprise platforms really stood us in good stead. So when the pandemic did hit in March, we were really in a good position to pivot and move from that face-to-face to blended to online model relatively quickly and relatively seamlessly. The one thing that we did see, though, was not necessarily the challenges around the technology, but how to use them and support them. So our efforts have been predominantly not in finding and sourcing new solutions, but in assisting our students, staff, and faculty how to use existing solutions more efficiently, more effectively that we'd already invested in.
So, Mark, one of the things that I've learned over the last 4 or 5 weeks in interviewing a lot of different experts and futurists and professors at different universities is that the university experience for a student is critical. I mean, that's like top of the list for a student, is that experience. How do you continue to provide that when so many classes are moving online, both because of the pandemic and just because of digital transformation?
That's a great point, Kevin, and it's one I think that at Oxford we would 100% concur with. I know we're not unique in that sense, but our students perhaps more so come to Oxford for that Oxford college collegiate experience. It is the networking, the diversity, the quality of ideas that comes from that. It's the peer-to-peer coaching. It's the leading professorial experience they get from those conversations. And then it's the broader Oxford experience in terms of the affiliation with the college and the college dinner and the networking that goes with that. And we actively encourage our students to throw themselves and immerse themselves into that Oxford life. And it's a very real challenge that we have seen during the pandemic. We have been fortunate, though, in that we have been able to, in the start of this academic year, maintain a level of face-to-face teaching. and our teaching has brought in a blended model. So we have been able to complement and support in lecture theatre teaching with virtual students and bring those together into one virtual community. I wouldn't profess that we've been able to replicate that 100%, but we have been able to connect people in a way to try and mirror and replicate that in some way to try and enhance and enrich that experience. And we really value that. It is an essential part and an important part of the academic curriculum and the student experience at Said.
So let's talk about campus next, Mark. What does all this digital transformation and impact from the pandemic, how's that going to affect the future of a university campus?
Well, I think just following on from the previous question, Kevin, I think personally there will always be physical campus. That student feedback, that student interaction, that student connectivity, that student networking is a really, really important part. So I think there will always be the concept of physical campus. But what we're seeing, though, is learning is an incredibly personal experience for students. So I think campuses are going to have to adapt to provide different ways of learning. Students will want to do that in a way that is incredibly personal to them. That might be at a time that is more convenient to them. It might be through a channel that is more convenient to them, or through a medium that is more convenient to them. It might be one-to-one, or it might be in a small learning group, or it might be in larger cohorts. So I think what we will see in terms of the campus of the future is one that is more flexible, that is able to provide those portfolio of solutions that best meet those student needs. And ultimately, this is where we should always be focused, provide the best student experience possible. And that comes from providing a range and a portfolio of solutions. It comes from providing a range and a portfolio of channels where students can learn that content, but making it the most intuitive, rewarding, and fulfilling learning experience possible.
Mark, in what ways will universities need to rethink their operations, their business models, and maybe even their purpose, given this kind of move into the digital world and the response to the pandemic?
I think that's a key question, Kevin, which every single university in the world will be thinking about now. How can they pivot in terms of the new challenges and ways of working that the pandemic has brought? Because one thing's for sure, we're not going to be going back and returning to the ways of working that existed prior to the pandemic. In this new digital world, we will need to think about, those student experiences as we spoke about. At a Said Business School perspective, I'm particularly proud to say that our purpose, I think, extends and is very applicable to the current global pandemic. The mission of the business school is to tackle world-scale problems. We exist to create the next generations of socially responsible, ethical, moral, entrepreneurial leaders that can go out into society, into communities with a real force to tackle those world-scale problems. And I think that is more appropriate, more current, more relevant than ever before. So it may not be answering your question 100% directly, but I think what it's allowing us to do at Said Business School is actually focus under the microscope on our mission and our strategy even more, because we think it's more relevant than ever before.
Mark, thanks for your insights there. Now let's talk about, let's ask you to kind of put back on your CIO hat for a second there. And let's talk about the technology. Where do you see a technology gap between where universities are today and where they're going to have to be 5 years out, maybe even 10 years out? What still needs to be, delivered to fill that technology gap?
Well, I think that comes in a couple of areas, Kevin. Many universities, especially within the UK sector, are still facing those challenges regarding legacy investments, legacy systems, legacy infrastructure, and the way that they have been knitted together over the previous years. I think that's a challenge that shouldn't be underestimated. So when we talk about what are the technology gaps, there's almost a technology deficit that still exists in some areas of UK higher education. And that has to be navigated and overcome. before you can even start looking forward. With that, the obvious directions around cloud, software as a service, infrastructure as a service are evident. But again, not all of UK higher education is in that space. So there is some catch up to be done. If we want to start thinking about future technologies, and it goes back to that place around being able to digest learning content in a way that is the most appropriate and convenient for our students, we have to think about what those channels are. Where can people learn? How can we provide those platforms? Electronically, digitally, device agnostically, and increasingly so in an inclusive, accessible format, recognizing our students come in many different shapes, sizes, diversities. So that is a key focus for us. But then if we want to start thinking about even further, the world is a big place, and particularly at Oxford, we would like to ensure that Oxford is more accessible to more students in more geographies than ever before. So things like virtual learning, things like holographic projection, to be able to take Oxford out to the world, are things that could be particularly exciting, especially when you were saying in terms of the previous questions, higher education and learning is becoming an increasingly competitive market. We are seeing new entrants all the time from new sectors. And we're not complacent at that, with that in Oxford. We know it's a threat that exists. We know that students have more choice and have more selection than ever before. So we need to make sure that we are providing the right student experience and that can be seen and that is tangible to ensure that we continue to be competitive and providing the best student offer that we can.
So, Mark, some questions have come in during our discussion here. So let me just ask one, and I think you might have touched on this in your last answer there, but where do you see the sources of competition coming from in the future?
I think that's a really great question, Kevin. I mean, in terms of sources of competition, we're already seeing it in some areas. Education is a growing, thriving sector, whether it be at a student level or whether it be at an executive education or at a corporate level. We're already seeing entrants into the market from a lot of the major consultancies of the world. We're seeing new entrants, especially as more and more digital and online capabilities are taking prominence. I think an interesting angle that we might look at as well is a lot of the big tech companies, the Microsofts, the Apples, the Googles of the world, have focused a lot in terms of primary, secondary and college education. I think in personal view, it's only a matter of time before they start looking at the higher education sector. They have the platforms, they have a lot of the content, they have a lot of the infrastructure to support it. What they don't necessarily have is the lecturing skill and capability that comes from having those world-class professors. It may only be a matter of time in terms of competitive entrance to the market that you see the University of Microsoft or the University of Apple.
Thank you, Mark.